Folks, I want to welcome you to Carolina Fishing TV today. We're on the Welder's Arc 56-foot Jarrett Bay.
Today we're going to talk about targeting three of North Carolina's most prominent inshore species, the speckled trout, the redfish, and the flounder.
We're going to show you basically what our tackle box consists of and the rigging techniques we use on these baits.
There's a ton of tackle out there available and a lot to choose from, and it's all about how much do you really need and what do you need. You know, how much do you need in that tackle box? So we're going to talk about that today and see if we can get an organized tackle box going, which you need to put on board your boat when you head out next time. One of the most sought after species here along the North Carolina coast is speckled trout. We target them heavily in the springtime and then again in the fall and early winter. Mike's going to go ahead and show you some suspending baits and some sinking baits that we often use in this area on speckled trout fishing.
We're going to start out with one of the old-time favorites. This is probably what I started out speckled trout fishing with, your basic mirror lure. Our best colors probably consist of what, three colors? The 808, the black, brown, gold side, orange bottom, and on a mirror lure you have the 52 series and the TT series. This is the TT with the spots. You're going to use that mirror lure in the deeper, heavier current. It's a sinking bait. And then your 52 series, we're going to use that in a shallow bay, no current. It's a suspending. It'll run in, you know, you can work it slower. You always want to remember you're going to work it as slow as possible. They've also come out with a new bait in the past couple of years, and that's your little shad. You know,
I think they call it a Miradyne.
Yeah, it's the 17 MR, and that's been killing them. Yeah. Over in the rivers where you had the small shad, it's just been absolutely killing the trout. You got to work it slow. It's a suspending, shallow water bait. Then you have your the new cork baits. I caught a lot of trout on these baits last spring in the 2 foot of water or less. They'll just about work just underneath the surface. When you find the trout aren't hitting top water, throw that right there and you'll see him take it. He'll boil the water when he takes it. They're a killer bait right there.
And those are soft baits too, as Mike mentioned,
yeah,
versus the mirror lures are hard baits.
All right, folks, next thing, when the water temperature, I find when it gets up into the 60s, upper 60s, these trout will hit a topwater bait and they'll crush it. You got a mirror lure top dog, and then you got their top dog junior, and then you got the old, the Zara Spook, old reliable. This is probably my favorite, the old Skitter Walk by Rapala.
Make sure you have more than one in the box because Mike will take that one on you.
And also mirror lure makes a mirror lure topwater bait. You can hear them rattles in it. This one will work just about on the surface, just a little under. That's a real good bait. They just started coming out with that one last year, I believe. Real good bait. I know you see the bait showering. We got bait in here showering everywhere. We don't know if it's reds or if it's trout, but something's working here. We're throwing some topwater bait to start with. Let's start out with the topwater, and we'll switch over later on in the day when the sun gets up to more than likely maybe spinner baits or jigs. But definitely, if you see trout crushing baits on the surface, throw your topwater. Trout they have an air sac. They fill that thing up with water. I mean, with air, they'll suspend in 20 foot of water right underneath the surface and be feeding on the surface. And if you're throwing jigs, you're throwing underneath them.
All right, targeting those speckled trout, quite often we find ourselves in deeper water. We typically use jigs. Jigs tipped with some type of soft bait, whether it's a scented soft bait or whether it's a non-scented bait like the traditional Mr. Twisters and Gotcha Grubs. Typically, Mike and I are usually using light jig heads if possible. We use the lightest jig head possible for each situation. When we find ourselves fishing several feet of water, just 2, 3, 4, 5 foot of water and stagnant water, we'll use a real light jig head. This is an 1/8 ounce model. We'll go down to a 1/16 ounce model, and we'll actually trim the head a little bit too, kind of directional trim it so it's digging into the water, and we'll go down to a 32nd of an ounce. And we usually choosing, for us ourselves, we really like those Berkeley Gulp baits, the scented baits, and we're using the 3 and 4 inch pogies depending on temperature. As it gets colder in the wintertime, we'll scale down to the 3 inch pogies. If the bite's hot in the fall, we'll use the 4 inch pogies and the 4 inch shrimp as well. But again, we're using those real light jig heads in shallow water or in you know, in conditions where there's not much current.
I don't need net. It's not that big. It's just decent. Trout. That's what was exploding on them baits right here.
Corky.
I think we found some trout here. It's about the 3rd cast after I caught that last one. Got him hooked up here. Feels like another decent trout. Yeah.
Decent, that's a nice trout there.
Yeah, nice trout. Oh yeah.
We find ourselves in deeper water, for instance, like fishing the rock jetties or fishing some of the edges near the inlets. For us down our way, like Brown's Inlet and stuff like that, Bear Inlet, we got some deeper water, 10 foot or better of water. And you know, you're not going to get that bait down deep. And when you're fishing that strong current near those inlets, like Mike talked about earlier, those fish can suspend. They'll do a little less suspending and more hiding behind eddies formed off from the bottom, I mean off the points of marsh, or little pockets formed off from shells and dips in the sand. So a lot of times those fish are down on the bottom in the current versus in the stagnant water. So then we got to step up in size. And you can use, again, these unpainted jig heads, or we'll step up a lot of times, these little heavier jig heads here. And you know, we'll go as high as a 1/4 ounce. Typically we're around an 1/8 of an ounce, but again, deep water we might go as high as a 1/4 ounce. And again, you can tip them with these soft baits. The other thing to think about too is, you know, is the how that bait is sinking in the water. And sometimes we'll step down to a real light bait, something that has less density, like the 4 inch pogies and the 4 inch shrimp. They're real dense. They got a lot of liquid in them. As a matter of fact, if you've ever let a Berkeley Gulp dry out, they'll shrink up to about half their size. Just to show you how much liquid juices in these things. Scent. But we can step down to a soft jerk bait like this, which is very light. Also pick up one of our really light jig heads, 32nd of an ounce, and now we can fish. Maybe not necessarily shallow water. We can definitely fish shallow water, but we can let, like Mike said, when those fish are suspending, we can go ahead and work that real slow. And even though there's a jig head on it, we can work it like a suspending bait. And it's just, if you can keep that bait in the water column, keep it off the bottom from sitting and digging in the bottom, a lot of times you just get incredible strikes. It just drives them crazy. So pretty much, you know, that's what we're looking at for working jig heads. Is the size of the jig head, the weight of the jig head, depends on the depth of the water and how strong that current is.
Trout. Nice one. Put the old pink pogie on.
As I'm casting, target casting to this tree, which I haven't caught a fish on yet, Mike's just caught 3 fish out in the middle of nowhere out here to the right.
Look, there's a shrimp whisker hanging out of his mouth.
Yeah, there is. Look at that.
He just fed on a shrimp in here. That's his whisker. The old pink pogie.
Stinky pink.
Just a couple things here. I ran a trip here last week to one of the jetties on the coast here, and I think we went through probably about 12 or 15 packs of gulp because the pinfish and the bluefish were bad. In them situations, you'll want these gotcha grubs. They work well, and without the scent, the pinfish doesn't hit them as bad. And just, you know, a couple other things. Let's see here. These power bait shrimp, when that water is clear and they're feeding more of sight, these seem to, you know, I've seen they you know, they'll catch better than a gulp just because of the, you know, the real look to it.
It's got a more natural look, a little more, you know, natural presentation to it.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a deadly bait.
They're also loaded with scent. They've got a lot of scent packed in that power bait as well. So.
And then, you know, on the trolling motor in the rivers, you know, searching for trout, we will use the 4 inch bait only because we can throw it twice as far as the 3 inch bait. I mean,
yeah.
We put a 16th ounce head on there, trim it down. This bait will run, you know, 6 inches under the surface, or you can use it heavier, you know, put a heavier head, but you can throw it a mile and you can really cover some area with it.
It really helps in those conditions. There's a lot of wind. Wind involved.
Wind situation, definitely.
Talking about targeting speckled trout, folks, there's several different rigs you can use involving involving corks, and one of those is actually a slip cork rig, slip cork or slider cork rig, and it's a tough one to set up. It takes 5 or 10 minutes to set up, so you want to keep an extra rod on board rigged with this, where you don't plan on changing it all day long. It consists basically of a few pieces. Right here, right on top of my thumb here, I've got a little pink string there. It's actually one of these. We call them stopper strings. They come on little pieces of straw that look like coffee straw, and they come equipped with an extra bead there, beads in the package. And basically what we're doing is we're taking our material, which is our fishing line, and we're using Berkeley braid here, Berkeley fire line, and we slide that little string up on the line. You pull the coffee straw out, put it in the trash can, tighten this down, you tighten that knot down. You don't want to cinch it down yet, you want to slide it, get it away, and just make it snug on the line, because you're going to want to adjust it after you get the rig put together. As soon as you put that stopper string on, the next thing you're going to do is slide the bead on, and eventually a real sharp hook that I put in the seat down here. And you're going to slide that little bead they put in the package on, and basically what happens is the string stops the bead. After the bead, you're going to slide on your slip cork, and there's a variety of adjustable slip corks out there. I think Billy Bay makes one right here that's actually has a wire inside of it. Helps it stand up. It's visible. That little red piece pops up in the air, and when a fish strikes it, that little red top there will pull down to the cork, and you have kind of a visual that you've got a fish on, as well as the fact that you've got a nice bright cork and a piece of cork raised up in the water column in case it's kind of rough or choppy. So you slide your slip cork on, and like I said, the string stops the bead. Well, the bead stops the cork. And then below that, we basically have some type of lead weight. We use sometimes, depending on the conditions, the tide and the current, we use egg weights, small egg weights, or we use little split shot, so you can just crimp on, one of the two. So that's below the split shot, we basically have our leader material, our swivel, a piece of leader, and a hook. Hook of your choice. If you're planning on keeping if you're into some big fish, we typically don't use a lot of treble hooks on a speckled trout. Mike was in some big fish the other day, and this is a rig he had tied on. The one thing you don't want to lose is a big fish. So if you're around a lot of small fish, we'll use a circle hook, and I think we've got a few of them right here. Here's some Baidachi, little circle hooks, and that'll keep typically he'll hook a speckled trout in his lip, in the side of his jaw. He doesn't swallow the hook, or if he does, it usually pulls out to the side of his jaw, and you don't gut hook him, and you can release that fish alive. But when you're in the big ones, you don't want to lose them, and you don't mind so much if he's gut hooked. We're going to put him in the cooler. We are. So we've got a treble hook on this one. We usually have anywhere from a foot to 2 foot of leader material. We like to use anywhere from a 25 to 30 pound test fluorocarbon material. Fluorocarbon is a little bit stronger against abrasion on the bottom, because our bait again is sinking down close to the bottom. Sometimes it is on the bottom. So we use a fluorocarbon leader, and like I said, we use about 12 inches to 24 inches depending on the conditions, and a swivel there. So basically what's happened is, as we go from location to location, we're able to adjust this stopper string for the depth of the water. Like Mike was talking about earlier, if we're fishing in some shallow water that's 2 or 3 feet, I can take that little stopper string and I can slide it right down within 1 or 2 feet of my sinker. And now what's going to happen, when I cast it out there, my weight's going to pull the line through my cork only to that adjusted depth. And it might take a few minutes depending on your situation where you're at, but you can figure out the depth of the water. If your cork starts hanging over like this, leaning over constantly, you've set it too deep. It's shallower than what you have it set at. So you bring it up, you adjust it a little bit shallower, until finally this cork drifts down the shoreline or the embankment. Maybe bumps bottom every now and then, but you're not just hanging on the bottom. Getting some deep water condition situations out of one of the rock jetties or the deeper areas near the inlets, you can slide that string up to 5 or 10 or 15, 20 feet, wherever you want, but it still allows you to reel your entire leader, your whole rig, all the way up when you want to, for casting purposes. Mm-hmm. Versus some other rigs that we use involving corks, which Mike's going to tell you about now, which don't quite give you that same advantage for fishing deep water. They're more shallow water rigs. Mike, can you tell them about that?
Yeah. Another cork is the popping cork.
Tommy's trying a popping cork rig.
That was a little one.
That's what we were getting all them hits.
Mm-hmm.
And small fish.
Couldn't get that big hook in them.
We'll use this mainly in probably 6 feet or less, 7 feet or less. And what you can do is tie anywhere from a 2 to 4 foot leader. You don't want to tie it too long because then it's hard to cast. But that noise right there will attract the fish to your bait, and you know, this power bait works real well underneath it. But any bait that you find that you're catching them on, the grubs, the 4-inch pokey, you know, whatever you want to use. But that noise right there, it's like a top water, and that's another thing. You know, it's like it attracts them, that noise. But then you have your bait underneath. When they're not taking that top water bait and they're hitting it behind it, but they don't want to strike it, throw your popper cork. They'll put it about 2 foot underneath your popper cork. They'll take it every time. It's a nice trout right here. Best one of the day, I believe. Oh yeah. Fish there's, he's pushing 3 pounds. Had a little break in action. Thought they were gone, but last 2 casts I had one on. Lost him, and now I got this one here. Another nice trout. Big trout.
Yeah.
Another one we have is the Billy Bay, and this is the slider. If you want to use just the rig Jeff just done, that slider rig, there's your noise on that rig there too. But most of the time, I mean, I don't use, the noise doesn't matter, because I'm going to use this rig in deep water.
Right, yeah.
I mean, you're going to target fish in the deeper water with this rig, and in shallow water, you know, you don't have to pop it. You can throw it out there and just leave it there, and you know, anything 4 foot or less, that's probably the rig that we're going to use.
Yeah. If we're around a lot of grassy bottom with this, we might even, you know, maybe we won't put a jig head under it. You know, Mike's talking about putting a jig head under it. Might just use a single hook under it with no weight on it, and then put your same soft bait on that, and that'll, you know, this way when you pop it, it'll quickly, you know, lift that bait off the bottom as it's sinking, but it'll suspend and go back down real slow versus if you had a jig head on it. So if you are fishing a lot of grassy conditions, and we do have, you know, a lot of grass flats here in North Carolina as well, so especially out in the sounds here with 3, 4, 5 foot of water with a, you know, thick eelgrass. So.
Right. On that Wounded Warriors trip, that's the rig we used because it was 4 or 5 foot, 6 foot. You know, you tie your 20 to 25 pound test fluorocarbon onto a hook and use live shrimp. You don't have to necessarily use the jig. You can put live shrimp, whatever you want on it. Works well. Really attracts the fish.